Welcome to the Resilient Schools podcast. Today's episode is a panel recording from the Bridging to Resilience conference I attended.
What does it mean to be a trauma-informed leader?
Well, since I have the microphone, I'll start. To me, it means that you see the people you're working with as people first, and students, teachers, clients, whatever your role is, second. They're human beings, and you need to accept all of them, not just their specific thing that's bringing them to you.
For me, it's about being willing to be vulnerable about my own trauma and leading from that place that I am a human and I've had things happen to me and model for what that means and how I've healed.
My name is Tracy Chauvin. I'm a clinical social worker, but the director of student support programs for one of the largest districts in Kansas. And so one of the ways that I view being a trauma-informed leader is that I'm ensuring that the actions that I do and the actions of the people I support bring no harm to others and work to mitigate any harm being done through current policies, practices, or procedures so that we can then go and address those policies, practices, and procedures that might be unintentionally providing harm to our community and those within it.
I feel humbled and grateful to be in this lane in my life, and when I see others, I see opportunity and connection.
They have not left much for us over here, have they?
Ditto.
All of that. So, I think for me, being a trauma-informed administrator person, I really do try to go into situations, kind of what you said actually was exactly what I was thinking is making sure that I don't shame anyone for being human, and I give my own self grace for being human. So being very aware of, first and foremost, that we're all doing the very best we can do, and that we need to connect with each other every day to help each other be our best selves.
I would say I'm kind of a newbie to this work, and certainly relative to the group up here, but my growth and experiences, leadership in this work requires the humility to recognize that your experiences and your understanding of things may not be everybody else's understanding or experiences or perception. So it takes a lot of humility to be a leader in this work.
Okay, this is a mouthful, okay? So what do administrators and school leaders need to be mindful of when we think of the latest achievements we are making in regards to the brain, the stress response system, and how these play out into behavior in the classroom? With everything we're learning, right? How are you guys taking that and getting that down into the system around what's happening in our classrooms?
So I can say that this is my second year. Prior to this, I ran an alternative education program, and I was very much influenced by Jim, and I'm proud that that environment was fully trauma-informed and responsive. I then have now moved into a middle school, and I think that what I'm having to learn is that I have to be patient and take people where they are. Change is scary. It can feel unsafe. So we have to provide the information, because when we know better, we do better. So I think for me, coming into an environment that is not what I came from before, I just have to, again, realize that everybody comes with a different lived experience, and so we just have to build the opportunity for people to come to the information by giving them the science, which is what I have found to be the most significant way that people can allow this information to be part of their lives and transform them.
I'm close to retirement, so I'm getting old, and my journey's getting closer to the end. And when I go into the environments now, I go in with a heavy heart because I see a ton of pain, and I see our kids hurting desperately. And what we know is since COVID, our teachers are hurting. And so to try to go into the environment now and try to seek the adults to see the value in this work, that it actually will bring joy and comfort to their lives if we can reach these kids and start teaching them the regulation and to help them see that there's hope in the future for their lives is becoming a tough challenge. And we keep talking about the research. The research is profound and has been for years that this is the direction we need to go. Our educational system is a research-based system, but we have denied the research as a whole, and we've embraced, or we got a chokehold on traditional practices in which the research has been telling us is failing desperately, and that's the pipeline to prison. So this work is so valuable, and I think we seek the heart of those that we're working with to see if we can cause something to happen to create the change that these kids desperately deserve, and the staff also.
How many of you are overwhelmed? Yeah. How many of you are like, where do I even begin? Okay. I'm speaking to you. The rest of you are liars. We talked about this. So Rebecca's question is really important because when you come to a conference like this, you learn 1,000 things that you want to go do, right? And how many of you are like, I can't do it all? So I go back to those pieces of regulate, relate, reason. Your job right now is just to regulate. Find one thing that you can change or shift in your environment, in your classroom, that's tangible. I have a woman I worked with. I worked with her 20 years ago. She sat in a session of mine, and she said, Stacy, I'm going to skip to specialists. We talked about this. Skipping, that's it. That's the only thing she changed. I'm going to give them movement as we're walking down the halls. Now, some of you are going, oh, skipping in the hallway, right? It changed the entire dynamic of her classroom, and it caused other people to say, what are you doing? You choose one thing. That's how you start. And you do that one thing really well. And then you choose another thing. You don't take all of it today and try to do all of it today. We are up here with decades of experience, right? When I'm in my own home, you would never even think I knew some of this stuff. You do one thing, and that's how it begins. And then when you start to see the shift, even one-on-one, then your kids in your class are going to go, oh, that worked with that kid? That's a really tough kid. I should try that. That's how it starts, and that's how it grows. And that's what you have control over. So for those of you that feel overwhelmed, choose one thing. And then build from there. Is that helpful? One thing.
So my answer kind of piggybacks off of what Stacy said. Working in a district level role, one of the things that I encourage all of our building staff to do is to find that one point of advocacy and really hone in on it and advocate up. Start with if it's a teacher leader, if it's your principal, your instructional coach, that one person that can be that ally with you in that advocacy, because then that starts to make incremental changes, such as what Stacy spoke about, because we know that we can only eat that elephant one bite at a time. And so an example of this would be, we suspend kids a lot in my district. We have state citations about it. That don't mean jack, y'all. That just means, hey, we noticed you did it. So we said over the course, this is my 4th year in this in central office, over the course of these 4 years, we have incrementally changed our code of conduct, the policies that then impact practice. We don't allow early childhood, because yes, we're trying to kids, through 2nd grade to be suspended without a point of contact with the department that I supervise, so that we can say, hey, what happened? So I started to give an example in our session a second ago, or earlier. We had a 7-year-old who had a taser. Tasers aren't allowed. That's a weapon. That's an automatic expulsion, y'all. Weapons are automatic expulsions. He's 7, so I get a phone call because you can't suspend. So I get the phone call, Tracy, and I'm like, what has happened? Who died? Like, what's going on? And this principal goes, he brought his taser. And I said, okay, tell me more. She tells me, turns out he did not bring a taser. The young man picked it up off school property. And the next day, while we were still doing some investigation, a mom calls and goes, hey, I dropped my taser out of my purse when I was at the building. So homie never even brought a weapon. He picked up a lightsaber, essentially. He picked up a toy in his head and was going, hey, press the button. Yeah, the taser things flew. It happens. He's 7. But we would have expelled that student 3 years ago because he had a weapon and it's a black and white policy. There would have been minimal investigation to find out how and why. And there would not have been the correlation of, hey, this mom called and said, because we would have already started the expulsion proceedings on this 7-year-old for having a weapon on campus. And I encourage you, as that small bite at a time, if you ever hear about any points of advocacy that is a work group, a cohort, whatever they want to call them, a cadre, join it. Volunteer to join it. Volunteer and lend your voice of advocacy, because the more voices we have, the more likely you are to be heard.
I'm going to edit based on what they said. So I said, and I do believe what I said, whatever. I believe what I said about being patient, but I think I might edit to say be patient with yourself. So last year, I'm just going to be straight up with you, I was in fight or flight like every single day. I was in a building where I did not feel safe. I mean, when I say that, and we can joke about it because some of these people are on a text thread where they basically helped me get through last year, because I was in a building that I didn't know anyone. I was not in my own community anymore. And at lunch, some days with 300 middle schoolers, I would be the only one in there. And I became, and we're gonna laugh about it, but I became afraid of grapes. Because I'm like, I'm gonna slip and fall because they throw grapes. And like, they're probably gonna just leave me here on the ground. So it became like, when I see a grape, I am triggered. And we can laugh, because I do laugh about it now, but I was like, I never thought I would feel this way about a fruit. But I just dreaded those days where I was like, it's gonna be pure chaos, and I feel so unsafe. So when I say you have to take people where they are as an administrator, like, we're feeling it too, and so we have to connect to each other to help. Again, there's self-care, but I like, again, community care. Like self-care, like Jeans Day, please. Okay, like no. But connecting together, because I wouldn't have been able to keep making steps forward if I wasn't finding my people. So when we're saying, if you pick one thing, then that's awesome. And you shouldn't feel like anything other than that's great. That one thing can make a huge difference to how many people. And then that, it's that ripple effect, right? That butterfly flapping its wings or something. So, small edit.
Go ahead, Chad. You went first last time. You went last time.
Well, first of all, when I was a high school principal, I got to a point where I told my kitchen staff that if they would clean the lunchroom, and we didn't have to worry about grapes after that. As a school superintendent, I think to answer your question, I'd say it as simply as I figured out pretty quickly I couldn't do everything that I wanted to do. Also figured out quickly that everybody else was smarter than I was, which is a great learning. But I would say in this case, you enable staff, you give them the resources, you have the staffing, and then you empower them, and then you get out of the way. And I'll share some of that tomorrow, but I'll keep it short and sweet.
Yeah, when it comes to science and the research, all that really is vocabulary that you didn't know yet. You're here, you already know what the right thing to do is. Even if the science is not there, more accurately, you don't know the science yet that says that's the right thing to do. You already know. So trust your instincts, trust that sage mind that you have that helps you be creative and solve problems, and do the things that you know in your gut are right, because your gut is not going to lie to you about those things. And if you are really striving to create great outcomes for kids, you're going to do the right thing almost all the time. And when you don't, it'll be the best thing that you knew what to do at the time, and then you can just keep on doing that every single day.
Wow. So this question, I've worked with hundreds of schools at this point, and this seems to be where people get stuck the most, around value systems and around, what's harmful for kids and what's helpful. And it's this conversation around discipline versus punishment. And so, what comes up for you as an administrator as you think about this particularly large hill we're trying to climb? Tracy, you kind of alluded to some of that, right? This happens and this happens. Boom. We taken the humans out. It's black and white. It's in the handbook. So talk to us about that. We've got a lot of folks out here who are on the road and they're stuck at that place trying to find their way.
I think from an administrator's perspective, the challenge is two things. One, quick and easy and get to all the other things I have to do versus taking the time to do what's right and best and then prolonging or ignoring all the other demands that are on my plate. And the other is the expectation and the understanding out there. You have teachers in your building, in your school, or parents that have this expectation that if something happens, if a kid is, I asked where she was, I apologize, because I taught a class last night of administrator wannabes, a graduate class, and a similar topic came up, and the teachers were angry that the student wasn't suspended. And so you have that as an administrator, this one group of teachers that expects immediate action and get them out of here, get them out of my classroom, I don't want to deal with this, I got these kids to teach, and then another that have a mindset similar to this group here where help me, give me the tools that I need to help the student, help this family. This is where this kid needs to be, but it can't be in this particular fashion. So those are the two things.
So as I told you, one part of my life was an English teacher, so I do love knowing where words come from, and I love looking at what specific words authors choose because they have so many choices. So for me, when I started thinking about discipline versus punishment, it comes down right to the root. Discipline, the root of the word discipline, it's about teaching and learning. It's centered around the opportunities that come from that process. Punishment, the root of that is about suffering. And so in the traditional methods that we want to call our discipline systems, a lot of them actually are rooted in punishment. We can call them whatever we want. Again, we can call a room, a calm down room, and if nobody's calming down in it, it's not what it is. But you can call it a calm down room. So you can call it discipline, but if there's not learning that's occurring from it, then and suffering is, then it's punishment. And so I am an educator. I will always remain an educator in whatever role I'm in. And so for me, whenever I am thinking about discipline, I'm looking to see how can I help this be a learning process. And so many traditional forms are not about learning. Because I just had a teacher in my office, and a student came to my office, we had a conversation, there was a consequence, and I really do believe we came at it from a learning point of view in terms of reflection and healing. And she came in later and she was upset. And she's like, they came back to my class and like the rest of the class doesn't think anything happened. So we had to talk about, and I kind of just asked, what would you have liked to have seen happen? What do you think would have been the learning if I did something different? Because they know that that's my philosophy. And I think it's important to be transparent about that. And then I was like, I can't control what they leave my office. They could say anything when they leave my office to their peers, right? It's about what happened in here and whether or not that student doesn't do that again because they've learned from it. So, that conversation went well because that teacher said, okay, you're right. It wasn't about me being right, but it was about us having a conversation too, because I want to learn and grow from that conversation myself. And maybe I didn't see something correctly or do something correctly, but in that case, she wanted suffering, and so we had to come back to, really, it's about learning.
I don't think I could say it any better than Jody just shared. Punishment is controlling behavior through fear, and we up the fear until we get control of the discipline, where discipline, as Jody shared so well, is to teach. And we call our other classes English or orchestra or whatever, we all call those disciplines. And so what do we do when we have kids come into our classes is we take them where they're at and we teach them and move them forward. And so that's the difference that I was traditional for 22 years of my career, and I loved kids. And once I learned the difference and started teaching versus telling, then We know that teaching draws connection, punishment creates disconnection. And so as we started connecting more with kids and teaching them, we saw a change in behavior, we saw a change in regulation, we saw kids advocating for themselves, and they were held at the accountability piece, which always gets fuzzy, is that if we're not holding kids accountable, we're failing them because we're not teaching them. So accountability is huge. It's how you define it. Punishment versus teaching. We teach it, that's when we start to see the changes that we want.
I think that there are some nuances to what's being spoken about in that when we think of that paradigm shift from traditional to more restorative, or that punishment to discipline, those types of mind shift change, what do we need to do to lay the groundwork for that to be successful? Because it's really, really awesome to say, oh yeah, they told me I can't suspend kids, I can't put them in ISS, I can't do this. So I think one of the biggest things that you can do immediately, thinking to Stacy's point around this, of what can you immediately take away, is say, I'm really interested in doing that. Can you model for me what that restorative conversation looks like? Can you be here an active participant with it? You're right, I really, really want that student to be in my class tomorrow. Can you help me figure out how I can make that structured schedule change for them so that they can be successful? Will I get some extra support in that? Feel empowered to have some limit setting around that so that you can build your own capacity and toolkit so that next time you go, ooh, I already know what the structured schedule can look like for the student that they would have traditionally been suspended, but instead they're going to come right back to my classroom. Oh yes, I want to have restorative conversations. I want to do circles. I want to do class meetings. Support me in doing that, because we really want people who are capable, confident, and comfortable doing all of these things. And if you feel uncomfortable or not capable, we know that efficacy piece is so important. We want you to be an efficacious person in your role. Ask for the help and support in doing it, because oftentimes I'm like, well, I gave you all these things. And then I think, oh, I gave you all these resources. I changed the policies. But did I really come in and look at you and say, hey, do you feel comfortable doing this? Probably not. And that's with anything. I encourage you to do with anything. Your new reading curriculum, your new math curriculum. Thank me later.
I like to think about discipline as keeping commitments to yourself and making decisions based on your value system. And when I think about it like that, that changes the conversation. Anytime a student does something to violate the other values that we have at the school, and it helps them see where their actions aligned or didn't align with what we believe at the school. Goes back to teaching, goes back to that control piece as well. The punishment is about forcing you to align to the school's beliefs. Discipline is about helping you see what you need to change in yourself to align with the bigger context that you are a part of, not just only thinking about yourself and your own actions.
So I'm a lot on the lines of Jethro. I think about discipline and punishment from the lens of relationship. How do I repair relationship? So if I'm in a classroom, if kids in a classroom and this kid has struggled in the classroom and they've been removed from the classroom for whatever reason, then the question becomes, what happened in that relationship that needs to be repaired so that the kid can return to classroom, but also the classmates will allow a kid to return to classroom. And so I think when we focus on repairing relationship, then, which means we have to have a relationship to begin with. I want to point that out. You can't repair relationship if you don't have relationship. But when we focus on repairing relationship, it leads us down the right path. It leads us towards the discipline piece and not the punishment piece. Nobody wants to get punished. That doesn't repair relationship. But when we repair relationship, we end up with the discipline piece.
Friends, I just want to kind of stop here for a minute because so much, there's been so many good things said. And I also want us to make sure we don't walk out of Bridging to Resilience 2023 thinking that all we do when kids have big behaviors is talk to them, is work through a circle. Sometimes, that's what I loved about Jim. He had to really reshape my thinking because I had experienced so much punishment in my life that I just thought, that anything that caused discomfort was harmful to kids. And Jim said, Rebecca, when we had relationship with kids and we activated voice and we got them regulated and we seek the cause, kids want to have consequences. The other thing is that, we need in-school suspension rooms that are actually trauma-informed and not prison. Right, so it isn't that we have to overhaul everything, and that I work with teachers a lot, and they're like, well, we can't take away recess. It's not trauma-informed. I'm like, well, how could you take away recess in a trauma-informed way? Can student be with you during recess working on, how they get more skill building around what happened? Can you walk with student at recess? Can you keep them attached to a safe, caring adult? And these are not easy asks of people, but I don't want us to think that we're just not doing discipline at all, because, discipline is an important part of how we function together in society, especially when we violated values. And when kids feel heard and they feel connected, they're just like us. They want to make it right. Jim, another thing that I think I caught from you a couple of years ago was when he was an administrator and teachers would send kids to him for discipline, he would regulate them, he would seek the cause, he would teach them strategies, and then at the end of all that, they would deal with, okay, you know that you told your teacher to F off and you flipped over a desk and we've got to do discipline. And after that, Jim would put a note inside of the teacher's box that said, here's what we talked about and here's the consequence that was delivered. And I think that is brilliant, because I think there's a disconnect. A lot of times what's happening is everybody's so busy that administrator is working with kid and they're doing the right thing, but nobody's circled back to teacher to say, here's how we handled it, here's what happened. So there's a communication gap there, and it creates mistrust. So, any other thoughts on that? Okay, fantastic, great. How do we navigate the reality that we have students experiencing toxic stress in the classroom from trauma, and it shows up in big behaviors, and it scares other children or educators or the other children's parents? How do we navigate that? What are you guys doing? How are you navigating that?
Can I tell a story? So, cultures of regulation. We just normalize regulation. How many of you do classroom rules at the beginning of the school year? Have the hall pass before you leave. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Raise your hand. Also, cultures of regulation. What I need might be something you don't need right now, but you might need later. So my son had an excellent third grade teacher, and they had T-stools in their classroom. 2 T-stools. You know what those are, right? Flexible seating. Some of you love that, some of you don't. Every week, that T-stool got assigned to a kid. And during a week, that kid could gift it to one of their schoolmates who might need it more. Teaching empathy, teaching culture of regulation, right? By the end of the school year, the same kid had the T-stool every week. We adults are like, that's not fair. My son said, Mom, why in the world are adults so caught up on fair? If that kid's regulated, we all learn. Isn't that the goal? So when we have kids who feel scared, kids who are scary, what we're looking at is their nervous systems. When we teach in our classrooms that this is a safe classroom where kids can get what they need, and it might not always be the same for every person because we all don't need the same thing at the same time, we can address those fear spaces. We can address what feels scary. When kids blow up and they have these big behaviors, one of the things we do is we don't re-enter them in the classroom in a way where we talk about it. And we repair and we go, what happened? Let's all work that out together. We have to do those hard chitty chats that really give kids language and opportunities to talk through some of that stuff. We also have to bring parents into the conversation of, we are a culture of humans that need regulation. Some things are going to go really well. Some things are not going to go well. We're going to talk about that, but we're going to normalize dysregulation and regulation, and we're going to talk about how to manage that in our classrooms. I got real passionate. Very passionate.
I would just add to that, we need to be honest and clear about what happened. My oldest daughter has Down syndrome and had some other students get in a fight who also have special needs. And what my daughter told me was different from what actually happened. But the key things is that I asked the teacher, I need to know what happened so I know how to talk to my daughter about this. And thankfully, he was frank and said, these 2 kids did get in a fight. Nobody went to the hospital. It wasn't bad in that sense, But my daughter was definitely scared and did think they went to the hospital. And when they weren't there, she didn't think they were suspended. She thought they were still in the hospital. It's important for me as a dad to know what's really going on without violating privacy, but also recognizing that things that happen in public also need to be dealt with in public. And you can't just say, sorry, we can't say anything because these students need privacy. Well, my daughter also needs closure and needs to know that those kids are safe and needs to be reassured multiple times that those kids are safe and that they have resolved the issue. And we can't hide behind this idea of privacy to say we can't talk about it ever at all. We need to still respect their privacy and respect people's need for closure and understanding of the situation.
I'm a little bit old-fashioned in that I truly believe, and I see this so often, is that we have great work going on with our counselors, with kids on certain incidents, but there's no communication that goes back. So I've always used a 3-copy referral sheet, disciplinary sheet, and when I was finished with handling the situation, 1 copy went in the teacher's box. If I was going to put a student in school or use it as a timeout, that went in Shelley's box, so she knew what was coming. And I also feel like when we have situations that need our attention, that a parent deserves the phone call. And too many times we leave the parent out. Kid comes home with a story that's a whole lot different than happened, and you get this parent screaming at you. It's because we don't communicate. And it takes time, but I think we have to have that circle of communication. I also believe that if a student truly disrupts a room that traumatizes the other kids, I don't think it's best to come down and process and put them right back in. I think there needs to be some time, and so we have to have places that we can put that student where they're supervised, they're cared for, they're processed with, but they need to understand that for the day, they're going to be in the quiet room, the calm room, secondary, in the in-school suspension room for the rest of the day or whatever. Too many times we get into, we can't do this because they're trauma and whatever, and then we miss that important teachable moment. And I think that's where the consequences come in that, again, I believe draw connection versus disconnection.
So I agree, like one of the important components of discipline is I always do share with my teachers my thinking process. And I think, again, this week when the teacher came, I want to have an open door. We can have those conversations, again, because I'm a human and there might be something that I haven't considered. And, apologizing, like I think as adults, it's okay. And I probably apologize like at least 3 times a day for something. But I agree with Jim in terms of I always want to have that dialogue with my teachers. But I do think that's also kind of like when we think about instructional design and the importance of kind of like front loading, that's where I think things like SEL, both on the adult side and on the student side, so that when students see those big emotions, they themselves have the knowledge to better understand them. Because I have had students in my alternative education program that have seen really big emotions, and because we spent valuable time front-loading emotional vocabulary, understanding the brain science behind our emotions, what might be happening, seeing behavior as communication. When one of their peers had those big emotions, sometimes they were kind of like almost on the front line of being able to co-regulate. So that's kind of, I think, the power of that. Again, we also have spaces because, yes, it's not always in the best interest of the student who is having the big emotion or the community or the adult in the room for them to go back in. But in the room that we have, that person is receiving training on being able to do restorative practices. We're building in opportunities for reflection. We want it to be a learning process, not just go sit in a room and process over and over and over and over again how you screwed up and what consequence is coming, and because that's not going to regulate them. So we build a room that, yes, gives that time and that space, but also helps us to foster the learning that we want to come from it.
One of the things that I think that is sort of a thread throughout what everybody's talking about is how do we normalize having these conversations in transparent ways. And one of the ways that I have seen be really successful in a building I was the social worker for is every student, so our early childhood through first grade students, theirs was more pictures and basic words, but they created a my ER plan, my emotion regulation plan, and it's 3 parts. And it is prevention, intervention, like in the moment, what do I do when I'm becoming dysregulated? And then postvention, what do I do to repair or mend any harm that happened if I became so dysregulated that I threw down everything in the room, tore everything up, assaulted people, all those types of things. And we had conversations about them during our class meetings of like, what does my postvention look like versus your postvention? And we would just call it repair. Like, it's just that simple. We called it repair, and it wasn't a big deal. And Stacy's might look different than mine, but we also during that postvention piece talked about what it looks like when we're dysregulated but not so. What do I need once I'm now like sitting here? I need silence. I need to be by myself. I don't need you to come hold my hand and talk and rub my back right now, because that's part of my postvention. And then so we also had our adults do it. And if you want to hear about more of that, come to my session tomorrow, because that's what it is. But we had our adults do it, and it just became the norm of that culture of care for everyone. And it became part of our norm of we do this at the start of every year with students. We do, and we revisit them at very specific times throughout the year. And we would front load, and we would create the ability to co-regulate because we all had a common language as well.
I don't know what else I can add to that conversation, Rebecca, other than, I think you mentioned in the question navigating the other parents of the other students in there, and I've been a part of those meetings as a school superintendent. But even in a bigger picture, another competing interest that exists is the political landscape of public school versus private school versus homeschool. And this is why we're pulling our kids. And so there's this constant battle to keep your students, to keep your kids, to keep this perception of public schools are safe and healthy and so forth. And so it's a constant political battle.
Chad, thank you for that, because I want people to understand that is, there's a real, I don't want to say polarizing, because I think it's a real push-pull kind of dance for, okay, how do we help kids that are bringing, and I mean, who in here are my elementary people? Or who in here are attached to elementary? Are you guys seeing just, many, many more kids coming in presenting with really big behaviors? And then you've got parents, just what you said, Chad, well, we're going to pull our kid and we're going to send him over here, or we're going to homeschool him, we're going to stick him in the private school 3 miles away. So as administrators, there's a lot of gut level pain for what is exactly the right thing here.
I'm going to take my kid to the private school where they don't have to take those
These
students
kids
that are dysregulated, that have any issues. And if they become that way, we'll kick
We'll
them
get
out,
rid of
and
them,
we'll
right.
send them back. And so it's snowballing at this point.
Can I just add only one thing to, we're talking about like how people in the room are feeling based on maybe a student's big behaviors, but I just want to also say students are very observant of the adult, and the adult has huge power in a student feeling safe. Even if there's something happening in the room, a student or 2 students are having a confrontation, the adult can have a huge impact on students still feeling safe in that environment, and they're watching how you respond to that situation just as closely, in my opinion, as they are watching whatever big emotions are happening with their peers.
Jody, I watched a training. I wasn't there, but I watched it where the presenter kind of talked to a guy ahead of time, and before everybody came in, and he had the guy kind of like, I don't know, be pretty disrespectful, right? And the presenter stopped the presentation and came over and chewed the guy out. Who was everybody mad at in the audience? They were mad at the presenter, right? Like, the guy was clearly out of line, But the presenter was helping them to see just what you said, Jody, that, the way that we handle these situations. I remember kids in my elementary school that were flipping desks and running out of classrooms. They were getting swats back then. They could only swat them so many times in an hour. So every hour they had to go to the principal's office and get swats. And they dragged these kids out of the room. And I was worried about what's happening to those kids, even though they were acting right. And so sometimes I think we also make big assumptions based off of cortex brain versus how other kids are experiencing this.
And I don't want to minimize how you're feeling. I said last year I legitimately was in fight or flight many days. However, I also believed in the power of and had awareness of my own brain and body to know that that was what I needed to do for myself to keep myself regulated. And then I had things, just points in my day where if I needed to go do deep breathing, anchor myself, go in my car and cry, whatever. I mean, just like one time. But anyway, because we're humans. So I just think that I'm not trying to say like it's not valid for you to feel all the feelings you're having, because those are hard moments in a classroom. I'm just saying that use that developed brain, know your own push buttons, know what you need to do for yourself to stay calm in those moments, and then, kind of have those things in place within your day that allows you to be able to kind of the stretch, like release.
I was just going to add something real quick. Not sorry. We've been talking a lot about the adult-kid relationship, and I just want to also point out that the kids that feel scary in your classroom become adults who feel scary in your classroom. And it's really important to remember the relationship between peers. My kids are both sophomores, and we have a kid that they've grown up with that's just really struggled. And my kids know this language. And one day my daughter came home and said, "Hey, I just want to let you know that Frank was super dysregulated today and hit me with a shovel." And I was like, "Well, did you ask for help? Did you tell anybody? Do any adults know this?" And she's like, "I mean, no." And I said, "So, yeah, an adult needs to intervene. It's not okay to be hit with a shovel at school. I just want to be sure to say that." And she said, "Mom, I know." And I just went to him and I said, "Hey, it looks like you're having a really bad day. I'd appreciate it if you didn't hit me with a shovel, if maybe we could just use our words and talk about it. And maybe we could work through it." And I think that's really important because this kid has been talked to by every single adult in the district multiple times. And what ended up happening, I did go talk to an adult, and I know his parents really well, and we kind of did a little mini intervention, all of us together. But what my daughter did was say, "I don't want to not be your friend because you hit me with a shovel. I want to be your friend before you pick up the shovel to hit me."
Was this Stella again?
Yes.
I think she might need to come next year. Stella is really, got it going on.
Right. I mean, I just think it's important to remember when you're sitting there and you feel overwhelmed, like I am one teacher and a student of 30 kids, and I have 10 kids who are all high needs. How am I going to manage this? Remember, you have little Stellas in your classroom. My son is another one. He said, "Mom, I sat next to this kid because I'm a really good co-regulator for this kid. He can do this. The teacher really pisses him off. I don't." Right? So think about that in your classroom. Look at that dynamic. When you start to normalize it, I'm not saying kids should be responsible for other kids, but we are a community. We are helping each other. And I just think it's important to remember you have that asset in your classroom.
Okay, I'm going to end us on a tough one. Those are all easy. Oh, and I was going to tell you, Stacy, Stella's up to like $50, and we're going to post that on socials. So how do you guys handle staff who are being kicked, hit, bit? Jim, will you open us on this one? Because I know that, how do you handle staff like in your building that are being kicked, they're being hit, they're being bit? And I know, Jim, you've gone in and worked with a lot of elementary schools, and so I want to make sure folks really hear you speak over this situation.
Well, I had a student at the other high school that they were trying to transfer into Lincoln. My special ed teachers came and said, you got to come to the meeting. This kid's 6'2", he's beating up the adults, the pairs that were helping him. But I attended the meeting and I heard how bad this kid was being harassed by kids, and they would harass him so bad that he would just lose it, and then they were looking for him to put on a show for him, and he did. He went after adults. And I turned to the two teachers that I told them I would keep this kid from coming and said, we got to take this kid, we can help him. And so we took this young man, but I don't believe in the kicking and the hitting and beating up of adults. And I brought his parents in and I said, I can guarantee you one thing, we will love him, we will create a nurturing environment, he will be safe here, he will not be bullied. I said, he cannot kick or slug one of our adults. I will take it seriously. He pushed it the first few weeks he was with us. He pushed it, and I had to bring the parents back in, and I said, we love him. We're watching out for him. He's not being bullied, but he got this thing that adults are kind of fair game. And I said, in this building, he's not going to kick or hit any of the staff. He's 6'2", he'll hurt somebody. And the dad turned to him and said, Richard, I've found there's no place that we've ever been that you've received this kind of love from a staff. Whatever they choose, Mom and I are going to support. I would have had him taken into JJC if he would have physically assaulted a staff member. And when Dad said that, Richard pulled it together. On Paper Tigers, he's the last one in line. He's a kid with autism that was giving high fives. He flourished at our school. And it was awesome having them there. But I personally don't believe that should be allowing kids to physically hurt people and then try to resolve and put them right back in, because we've got trauma on both sides of those issues. But we need to let them know that we love them, we care about them, but we also need to teach them what's going to happen if you were to cross that line, which we pray that you don't.
So I would like to share from the perspective of somebody getting assaulted by a child, a second grader, who, when I was the assistant principal and wearing a tie, he pulled my tie to strangle me and saw that he was pulling the long end, which doesn't tighten it, and stopped and switched to the short end because he knew exactly what he was doing and knew how to make the tie tighter. And the way that my principal and the executive director of our school responded was by saying, well, we should do an investigation and figure out what happened. And they came back and said, Jethro, it was your fault. You escalated this student. And let me tell you, that is the wrong answer, because I was doing the best that I knew how to do. And to say this is all your fault and you brought it on yourself is not helpful, even if it's true. And so did I escalate him? I don't know. I don't remember, to be honest. I don't know what I could have done differently to not make that happen. I was doing what I believed I had been trained to do and what they had suggested to do, and I was doing the very best that I possibly could. And they said, this is your fault. Now, that's not the way to do it. And so I vowed that I would never blame a victim for the rest of my career. And there were a lot of times where it was hard. When I had a teacher who was actively agitating students so that she could get out of coming to work, so that she could be injured and not have to be there, and I knew that that was going on, I still did not blame her, and I still gave her the benefit of the doubt, but we put systems and supports in place so that she wouldn't ever be alone with students. She always had a para or another teacher in there with her to make sure that we had another witness who could talk to that and say what was going on. And so instead of suspending this student that strangled me, they said he's coming back to school the next day, and didn't have any of that resolution with me or him. They basically said, you're not allowed to be around him anymore because you escalate him. And again, this was a kid that I loved, that I thought the world of, and it was a tragic accident that doesn't have to end that way. So my advice would be to be cautious about how you handle the aftermath as well.
Aggressive students are full of fear, right? And so are the adults who deal with them. And I think in my work, I can think of, as you're speaking, I think of multiple situations. I got into this work because I was restraining a kid, right? And thankfully, my response naturally is a flight response. If I had had a freeze response, I would have knocked the kid out, right? So when I think about aggressive students, I also think about what is in that environment that is causing them to be so activated and so stretched. And I don't think it's the teachers. I think it's the sensory environment. I think it's being in a lunchroom of 300 kids with one adult. I think it's getting off a bus, right? I think their nervous system is already activated. And then I think not all students are ready to be successful in all classrooms, right? I had a kid that came out of a residential treatment center. He'd been in residential treatment for 9 months. He got discharged before his treatment was complete due to insurance, and he got dropped back in a public education system. And the staff called me and they said, Stacy, we're in the middle of a staff meeting. We need you. What's up? Well, there's 10 of us here and we're talking about how we're going to support the student. This is what we're going to do. He hasn't been in a public education system in 9 months. We're not going to put him back in the classroom right away. Is that okay with you? Sure. Right? Is it okay with the parents? Is it okay with the students? We're going to bring him in and we're going to make him a teacher's aide in a younger classroom for a period of time so he can adjust and he can be successful and he can teach kids what he already knows and he can integrate in a really easy way. We're going to give him lots of regulation time, right? Aggressive students need out-of-the-box interventions and strategies. Teachers who've been assaulted also need out-of-the-box interventions and strategies, and they need empathy. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation. So I think those are just food for thought.
I mean, I wanted to be clear, although I think that we for sure over-suspend and, there are times that I suspend students. I mean, I'm just going to be, it's not, all or nothing. And so my staff, when, they have to experience that, I mean, that is one of the most serious things because they are there with 30 kids. And so those are instances that I'm more apt to suspend a student. But again, sending them home is not going to change the behavior. So it might give us an opportunity to come up with a plan. It might give us an opportunity to have conversations. It might give us an opportunity to figure out next steps for everybody's well-being. But the suspension in and of itself is changing nothing. And so when I was in alternative ed, my first semester, I mean, it's the lightest I've ever felt that this tiny little student was able to throw me up against a wall. I was like, maybe I'm lighter than I think. Because she was little and I was fluffy, but I got a concussion. And, it was the first injury I'd ever gotten. However, I will say this, it was that time we were making the transition to a trauma-informed and responsive community. And that semester was tough because we were all trying to get on the same page as adults. And once we all got in step in a space full of fighters, I never had another fight again. And if anything, I worried that students were overly protective of the adults and would, want to step in too often to protect us. So again, I just think that if administrators and teachers and community leaders and those that, I'm so glad that we have somebody who's a superintendent here and school boards can sort of start communicating and create these environments, we'll see so many fewer chances of those kinds of unsafe behaviors. I believe that at my core.
This might sound overly simplistic, but I ask a couple of questions to everybody involved. I ask it of the students' parents or loving caregivers. I ask it of the staff that was there. I say, what will help you feel safe? Who could help you feel safe? How can we make this happen? And I just ask those questions because if I don't know, I can't help, or I assume that things would help, and then I do things poorly. Or I give Stacy a bunch of shit she don't want, and she's like, well, you're just throwing more stuff at me to do. And I'm like, I'm really sorry. I didn't know what you needed to feel safe, so I just thought that this might help. And then from there, we try to think about how we can actually manage it and make it feasible and viable and sustainable. So oftentimes what the adult says is, I need more staff. So then I say, let's look at your master schedule and let's look at every single person in your building and how we can create a schedule of half-hour increments in Miss Stacy's classroom. And that is the easiest. This sounds so funny, but early childhood is well-staffed. It's the easiest there, and then the second easiest place is actually our high school campus, our campuses, because we have 7, 5, a lot, and then our alternative high school campus, because they have a lot of staff. And so we literally look at minute by minute and say, okay, this is this person's extra plan time because of XYZ. They're going to come in for 30 minutes because I know this is a really rough hour for you. And so how can we make that an intentional time? And we look at that too, so it's not just a warm body filling space in your classroom, but intentional in what co-teaching models we're using, how we're really putting a sustained plan around that student. And then we do the same for the student in terms of how they respond to us, of what would make you feel safe, who would make you feel safe, how can we make this happen, and talking through that. And we get the best response from parents because they feel included in the plan and they don't feel like it's this intentional punishment because they're already coming in feeling shamed and blamed because their student's the one that just punched in the baby maker 3 different times or whatever it was. And so they really want to feel included. And so how can we empower everyone to have some of that voice, choice, and autonomy within these plans that we make for people?
How many of you just want to put Tracy in a box and take her back with you? Oh my goodness.